I'm not the type to get scared easily, but what happened in my new apartment turned my understanding of fear upside down. It all started when I decided to change my life and move to another city, far away from old problems and disappointments. I managed to find an apartment in a rather prestigious area where everything seemed perfect. The huge building with its modern design was impressive in its luxury. I immediately felt comfortable when I first stepped into my new home. A spacious apartment with large windows letting in plenty of light seemed like a true paradise to me. But I didn't yet know that this paradise would quickly turn into a nightmare. At first, everything was fine. I enjoyed my new life, made new friends, and adapted to the new conditions. But one day, I started noticing strange things. At night, I heard quiet footsteps in the hallway, even though I was sure I was alone in the apartment. These sounds repeated every night, and I began to feel uneasy. One evening, I decided to investigate these sounds. Armed with a kitchen knife, I went out into the hallway but found nothing. This calmed me down a bit, but not for long. The next time, the sounds were louder and closer. I felt like someone or something was watching me. Paranoid thoughts began to fill my mind. I checked the locks multiple times, inspected every corner of the apartment, but found nothing suspicious. However, the feeling of danger never left me. One night, I returned home late and noticed that the door to my apartment was slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it before leaving. My heart started pounding. Carefully entering, I saw that everything was in its place. Nothing was broken or stolen. But the sense of anxiety only intensified. One day I noticed something strange on my phone. While browsing the gallery, I found several photos that I definitely hadn't taken. They showed my apartment from different angles, as if someone had been photographing it when I wasn't home. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. How could this have happened? Who could have done this? I immediately contacted the building manager and told him about my suspicions. He reassured me, saying that it might have been a mistake by the staff. But I didn't believe this version. I began to suspect everyone around me. The feeling that I was being watched haunted me. One day, I decided to stay home all day and night to try to catch the intruder in the act. I turned off the lights and hid in the corner of the bedroom, watching the door. The night passed without incident, but in the morning, I found that my laptop was missing. I was shocked. Who could have entered the apartment when I was home and heard nothing? The following days were a real nightmare. I started seeing shadows quickly flitting past the window, hearing strange whispers and footsteps. I couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate on work. The sense of danger was a constant companion. Finally, I decided to install surveillance cameras. This was the last straw. One day, while reviewing the footage, I saw something that made my heart stop. The footage showed a man cautiously entering my apartment when I wasn't home. He walked through the rooms, touched my things, and then disappeared into an unknown direction. I immediately called the police and showed them the footage. They began an investigation but found no signs of forced entry. It seemed this man knew how to avoid all the traps. They said they would keep an eye on the building, but this didn't reassure me. My paranoia grew. I could no longer live in those apartments. I decided to move, leaving behind all the memories of this horrible experience. But even after moving, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Now every time I hear a quiet whisper or see a shadow on the wall, panic grips me. I no longer feel safe anywhere. What happened in those apartments changed me forever. I will never be able to live peacefully again, knowing that there's always someone or something that can enter my life uninvited. The story I told is my truth. It's not fiction, not fantasy. It's reality that became my personal nightmare. And now, knowing my story, maybe you'll start looking at the world differently too, listening to every sound and watching every shadow. Because sometimes the scariest things are right next to us and we don't even suspect it. When I decided to move to a new city, I had no idea what horrors awaited me in my new apartment. It all started very ordinarily. I found an ad for an apartment for rent at an attractive price in the city center. The apartment was on the 7th floor with a nice view and freshly decorated. It seemed like the perfect place to start a new life. The move went quickly. The apartment owner, a man in his 50s, looked a bit tired but friendly. He showed me the apartment, where everything was in place, new furniture, modern appliances. I immediately signed the lease and got the keys. The first few days passed without incident. I unpacked my things, settled in, and went to work. But then something strange began. At first, I heard a slight creaking sound. It came from the hallway, as if someone was slowly walking on the wooden floor. When I went out to check, I saw no one. I thought it was probably the neighbors and paid no attention, but the nights only got worse. I often woke up with the feeling that someone was watching me. In the dark room where the outlines of the furniture were barely visible, I felt a gaze. It was eerie. I tried to calm myself, saying it was just my imagination, caused by the stress of the move. One night, I woke up to a loud knock. It was a knock on my apartment door. Who could come so late? I got out of bed, went to the door, and looked through the peephole. No one. My heart was pounding. Adrenaline was surging. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, but it was empty. Maybe someone just mistook my apartment for theirs. The next morning, I decided to talk to my neighbors. The first woman I met was elderly and a bit irritable. She said she hadn't heard anything and closed the door in my face. Other neighbors were also not very friendly. No one knew or wanted to say anything. The nights became increasingly disturbing. Now it wasn't just creaking and knocking. I began to hear a faint whisper. The words were indistinct, but they gave me goosebumps. It seemed like they were coming from all directions. I started losing sleep and peace of mind. One evening, coming home from work, I noticed a strange smell in the apartment. It was a faint smell of dampness and decay. I searched the entire apartment, trying to find the source of the smell, but found nothing. The smell disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. The next day, I decided to stay home to rest. Sitting on the couch with a cup of coffee, I suddenly heard a quiet sobbing. It came from the next room. Getting up and approaching the door, I hesitated. I opened the door and peeked inside. No one. Only silence and darkness. I started to believe that something was wrong with this apartment. Every time I left the room, I felt someone watching me. One evening, coming home late, I noticed that one of the pictures on the wall was turned upside down. I clearly remembered hanging it straight. Approaching closer, I saw that someone had written something in red marker on the back of the frame. It was one word: leave. My hands trembled. Who could have done this? Had someone been in my apartment while I was away? I decided to call the police. Officers arrived quickly and inspected the apartment. They found no signs of a break-in or any strangers. I felt helpless. The police couldn't do anything, only advised me to change the locks. I could no longer sleep at night. I sat on the couch, listening to every sound, trying to understand what was happening. One night, just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard a loud crash in the bathroom. Jumping up, I rushed there. Opening the door, I saw that all the mirrors were fogged up. On the fogged surface was written, "Leave." My panic reached its peak. I didn't know what to do. The apartment had become a real nightmare for me. I felt like I was losing my mind. All these events began to affect my work and relationships with colleagues. I became withdrawn, nervous, and constantly tired. One day, I decided I couldn't stay there any longer. I started looking for new housing. Finding another apartment, I quickly packed my things. The last straw was what I found in my bedroom. On the floor was a piece of paper with the words, "You can't escape." Leaving the keys on the table, I left for good. Walking out of the building, I felt incredible relief. But the fear didn't leave me. Even in my new apartment, I continued to feel like someone was watching me. Every sound made me jump. Time passed, but the memories of those terrible nights in the apartment still haunt me. I never found out what exactly happened in that apartment, but I know one thing for sure. Sometimes it's better to leave everything as it is and go, rather than trying to understand what lies behind the eerie events. My new apartment has become a refuge for me, but the fear still lives in my heart. I always thought that living in an apartment was convenient and safe. But what happened to me in one such building in Chicago forever changed my perception of this place. It all started when I moved into a new apartment. The building seemed cozy, and the apartment met all my requirements. Third floor, spacious living room, modern kitchen, and even a balcony with a view of the park. I was pleased with my choice and quickly settled in. The first week went by smoothly. I enjoyed the peace and quiet of my new home. But one evening, returning from work, I noticed something was wrong. When I entered my apartment, it felt like someone had been there before me. The door was locked, but I felt a strange sense of unease. I checked all the rooms but found nothing suspicious. Maybe it was just the stress from moving and work. The next evening, I came home late. It had been raining all day and I was soaked to the bone. As I entered the apartment, I felt that same unease again. Turning on the light, I saw my knife on the kitchen table, which I had left in the drawer. It was strange, but I chalked it up to my forgetfulness. But the situation worsened. Over the next few days, I started noticing strange things. Objects in the apartment moved, even though I distinctly remembered where I had left them. Cabinet doors and drawers were open, though I had closed them before leaving. I began to doubt myself, but couldn't find any rational explanation. One night, I woke up to a strange sound. It was like a quiet whisper coming from the living room. I got out of bed and went to check. Turning on the light, I saw that all the furniture was in place, but the sound persisted. It came from one corner of the room where my old wardrobe stood. I approached the wardrobe and carefully opened the doors. Inside, it was dark, but I saw something that made me freeze. On the back wall of the wardrobe, there was a small hole through which a faint beam of light was coming. I felt cold sweat on my forehead. Someone was watching me. I quickly closed the wardrobe and decided to call the police immediately. The officers arrived quickly and thoroughly inspected the apartment. They found the hole and realized it led to the neighboring apartment. The police went to the neighbors, but no one answered the door. After a long series of knocks, they decided to break in. What we saw in that apartment was horrifying. The entire room was filled with cameras, monitors, and recordings. Every screen showed my apartment from different angles. Someone had been watching me all this time. They also found several photos of me, clearly taken without my knowledge. The police arrested the owner of the apartment, who turned out to be a mentally ill psychopath. He confessed to installing hidden cameras throughout the building and watching all the residents. His motivation remained unknown, but his illness explained a lot. I immediately moved out of that apartment, but the feeling of anxiety and paranoia stayed with me for a long time. I no longer felt safe at home or on the street. Every time I entered my new apartment, I checked every corner and drawer, looking for hidden cameras or signs of intrusion. This incident forever changed my life. I realized that even in the safest place, danger could be lurking. Sometimes, even in our own homes, we don't know who is watching us. I never thought that moving to a new place could become the scariest experience of my life. But what happened in the apartments on Main Street made me reconsider my perception of safety and privacy. I needed to find a new place to live quickly, and I came across an ad for renting apartments in the heart of the city. It was a modern building with all the necessary amenities, a pool, gym, and parking. Everything seemed perfect. I signed the lease and started preparing for the move. The first few days went by without any incidents. I was settling in, meeting neighbors, and shopping for my new apartment. But one evening, returning from work, I noticed something strange. The elevator I used every day stopped between floors. The light flickered, and I was left in darkness. Cold sweat broke out on my forehead, and I started pressing all the buttons. After a few minutes, the elevator started working again, and I managed to reach my floor. I chalked it up to a technical glitch and didn't think much of it. However, the following events made me reconsider. At night, I often heard strange sounds behind the wall of my apartment. These weren't the usual sounds of neighbors, footsteps, voices, or the TV. It was something else. It sounded like someone was carefully moving furniture, creaking doors, or whispering softly. I checked the hallway several times but saw no one. One evening, I decided to leave the lights on and not turn off the TV to calm my nerves a bit. I fell asleep on the couch but woke up with the feeling that someone was standing next to me. I opened my eyes abruptly, but there was no one in the room. The TV was showing static, and the light seemed dimmer than usual. I attributed it to fatigue and stress, but the feeling of anxiety didn't leave me. The next day, I decided to talk to my neighbors. It turned out that many of them had also experienced strange things. One neighbor said he saw a shadow in his mirror that moved on its own. Another heard footsteps at night when there should have been no one in the building. I started researching this building online, and what I found made my blood run cold. The building was constructed on the site of an old hotel that had burned down several decades ago. Many people died in the fire, and many were never found. There were rumors that some of these souls still linger in the building, seeking peace. I decided I needed to do something to stop this madness. I bought a surveillance camera and installed it in my apartment. The first few days, nothing happened, but one night, reviewing the footage, I noticed something strange. At night, while I was sleeping, the door to my apartment opened, and someone entered. It was a shadow, but it moved like a person. It approached my bed, stood there for a few seconds, and then disappeared. My heart froze. I realized it wasn't ghosts or spirits. It was someone real who had access to my home. I immediately called the police, but they found no signs of forced entry. They couldn't even explain how someone could enter my apartment without a key. I decided not to stay in that building a minute longer. I packed my things and moved to a hotel. The next day, I returned to pick up the rest of my belongings, but found my apartment locked. My key didn't fit. I approached the manager, but he said they had no record of my tenancy. My name had been erased from all documents as if I had never lived there. I realized I had fallen victim to something much bigger than just strange sounds and shadows. Maybe it was some kind of experiment or conspiracy. But one thing I knew for sure. I would never return to that building. And every time I pass by it, I feel cold sweat on my forehead and hear a whisper echoing behind me.